ye are in heaviness through manifold temptations, that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ, whom having not seen ye love, in whom though now ye see him not, yet believing, ye rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, even the salvation of your souls. We'll jump to verses 13 to 16. Wherefore gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, not fashioning yourselves according to the former lust in your ignorance, but as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation. Because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. The Lord will have blessing upon reading this word. So we pause for a short prayer. Father, we thank you for the words that we have read today in the description of how you show your power and show your plans, oh God, even to the life of the Israelites before, that we could also examine how you are good to them, how you have shown your promises and faithfulness to these people. And we just pray that you will speak to our hearts and give me wisdom as I share your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Alright, so trials of the Red Sea. So this is how we're going to learn tonight that as a Christian, we are not free from trials and temptations. Sometimes there are some Christians, or especially our new believers, they will say, if I will become a Christian, then I will be free from troubles, free from trials. That's their own concept when they step in as a Christian. And it's like they are sailing, there's a smooth sailing from day forward. And then when troubles arise, these people are overwhelmed by the unexpected problems. But we know that the Bible assures us that all Christians give us the word or the idea that we'll pass through difficult times. There's unexpected problems that we could pass on through. As we have just studied here, as I just make a review, I study this afternoon, just received, the one that I have shared earlier about some of our members of the family who lost their loved ones. It is really difficult. Like Brother Randy Sakala, I just met him in Bukidnon, where I became the speaker of the Philippine National Youth Camp, and he was there. Most of the pastors in the area were there, and many young people. And then I talked to him because his dad was also a pastor, and his dad and my dad are also friends before. And we haven't met, actually, it was our first time that we meet together, and I just know that he's the son of Pastor Sakala, and he knew that I'm the son of my dad. And then we have, mutual conversation. And he was a missionary to Iloilo. Iloilo is somewhere in the Visayas region, and the dialect there is Ilonggo, and it's different from our, in Mindanao, which is Cebuano, which is Bisaya. And he said that he has difficulty of ministering to these people there, though they are also Filipinos, but the way he presented the gospel, he must know how to speak the dialect, because most of the folks there don't know how to speak our dialect in the south. So eventually he has some issues regarding learning the language, shall we say, is like another language, because in the country, recently I read that there are over 150 dialects in the Philippines, but we call it languages because it's really different from one to another. And sometimes we cannot understand each other when we're speaking in our own dialect, but we need to speak our national language in order to understand. But sometimes speaking English, so it doesn't work with some Tagalog words. And And he said that after I think 2 or 3 years, the missionary that we have supported in Buhi, rather in Barui, was transferred to another city, and Pastor Sakala was the one who was assigned by the sponsoring church from the States to you know to take care of the church there, as well as for the Bible Institute. And we came over there last year when we have our vacation, but it was unannounced that I will visit the mission there. And there was only one student there that, was repairing, constructing additional kitchen for the students. And there's no classes at that time. And Pastor Sakala was attending, I think, a graduation, but I don't want to bother him. So I told the student that I will just came over here to visit, just to see the place. And then me and Sister Daisy took some pictures and just stayed there for a while, and then left back to another city. And then I was not able to talk to him. It's only through email and through the messenger. And it's so sad to hear that he's already gone with the Lord. But in some sense, he is now together with God. That's a blessing. But at the same time, it's also sad for the family who he left early in his young life, that he could still serve the Lord, but he had different issues in his physical life. So therefore, I believe God has another plan for it. So the question is, why does God allow tests and trials to come into the lives of His children? Surely He could keep them from happening if God wants it. God is all-powerful and can do anything He chooses. The question is, would it really be beneficial for Christians never to have difficulties? So the example here is an athlete. The athlete increases strength with intense exercise. And during workouts, it might produce pain in his body, but they also increase the strength. Though it might hurt, exercise is beneficial to one's health. That's a good advice from the doctors. We need to have exercises, especially in this present situation. It's very cold. It's difficult to make exercises. By the way, Pastor Carol Williams just sent a hello to us, and he just looked from some pictures from the camp, and could reminisce the past, and he misses a lot, because he has a lot of friends here. And he said that the storm in the States was really, very awful, because in their place, in the area where he lives, I was there many times, he said that's about 30 inches. I said, 30 inches? And now they could not go to their church because of this about 40 inches going there to their church. Wow. From his place towards the church is about 5 to 10 minutes, drive. So they could not get into the church because of the snow. It's very awful. So they said that they will not have church this Wednesday evening because of that. Hopefully that it will melt down. Like here, at least in Copenhagen, the ice has already, the snow has already melted. I don't know, this room is still there.
It's mostly gone.
Mostly gone now. So many are happy going now, because at least we're going to the springtime. Now, sometimes in the test, like in the school, teachers give tests to see how the students are developing. In the same way, God brings trials into the lives of His children. And it's like the example of Job in the Old Testament. He is a great saint of God. He loved the Lord and despised evil behavior. God knew the heart of Job and understood his faithfulness. Yet a terrible test came into his life. You know that story. When the trial was over, Job was strong enough to pray for those who had belittled him. The test revealed and increased his strength. So there is a purpose in every trials and testings that we encounter. it's awful to have the trials, you know. Sometimes we don't want to have that. We'll say, Lord, please, don't give me trials or problems or temptations. But that's a part of our Christian growth, because that's the place that we are depending upon God at all times. That is beyond our power to solve the problem. That's why we cry out to God, Lord, please help me. I cannot do this. You know, if you cry out to God, so you depend upon Him, and then the glory of the Lord will be revealed when He will show His answers to our difficulties. Now, how are God's people handling trials in their lives today? We should never think they are immune to troubles. Learning how to handle such difficulties is important. And this lesson deals with the nation of Israel as it departed from Egypt. The people of Israel were following the leadership of God. They faced a difficult situation. They were there because God wanted them to understand His value to them. This test could strengthen their resolve to follow God, no matter how difficult the way might be. So, first here, the problem of fear. The children of Israel had been in the land of Egypt for 400 years. 400 years, that's too long. The Philippines were under the Spanish regime for 360 years. It's almost the same. So that's why most of the cultures of the Philippines came from Spanish. And Sister Josephine went to Malaga recently to visit her brother and her sister-in-law. And she said, you know, Pastor, I could really relate that we are, you know, our influence, we are influenced by the Spanish people. I said, why? Because you can see there, it's in the streets, they're shouting, they're laughing so loud. And then in the apartments that my brother is living, so noise in other, you know, in other doors. And I said, it's really like the Philippines. So, well, I said, we're influenced for 360 years. So, you can just imagine, you know, we pattern the lifestyle that they have. And, well, we know also the religion that Spain brought to the country. So, that's why we are predominantly Catholic. So, if we'll be under in another nation that observe another religion, perhaps will be the same as they are. So here they had begun their sojourn there in the best of positions. They were the family of Joseph who had preserved Egypt through his wisdom and foresight. We know from the past lessons that there are only 70 who went to Egypt through, you know, family of Jacob and Joseph. And eventually they became a big nation, and the pharaohs who came over and took over who ruled Egypt forget the descendants of Joseph who helped them. So instead of they are part of their system in their nation, they consider them as a threat or an enemy. So that's why the Pharaoh made them slaves at that point, so that they will not be able to overcome the country of Egypt. Now here, as a result, his family was highly respected. After that generation died out, the next generation forgot all Joseph had done for Egypt. They saw the Israelites as a potential enemy, and as a result, the Egyptians put them into slavery. The Israelites served many years under harsh conditions. Finally, God saw fit to send them a deliverer through Moses. The mighty hand of God was raised against Egypt. 10 terrible plagues afflicted Egypt. And this is what the wise men of Egypt declared, that the plagues came from the finger of God. That is in Exodus 8:19. So they realized that it's really from God. You know, you remember those plagues? The frogs, you know, lice, and all those things. And finally, the killing of the firstborn son. Now the land was destroyed. The people of God followed his leadership and came to the shores of the Red Sea. The hard-hearted Pharaoh realized he had lost his workforce and determined to force them back into slavery. So he took his army out to find his escaped slaves. When the Pharaoh found them, they were encamped by the Red Sea. So the Israelites were entrapped were trapped in the Red Sea. They are there trying to approach them. And he thought they were trapped and at his mercy. So when the Israelites saw Pharaoh coming with his army, they were sore afraid. Sore afraid, terribly afraid. Or overwhelmed with fright. So they are really terribly afraid. So they were so afraid, they did not know what to do. They cried out unto the Lord, that is in verse 10, but this cry is not a cry of prayer. It's not a cry like, Lord, please help us. But it was a cry of complaint. Complaining to Moses. They thought they were about to die in the wilderness. Then the Israelites said, what's better to go back to Egypt and rather than staying here and die in the wilderness. Much better to be a slave. So they are complaining. They do not put their trust in God. It's God who take them out from Egypt. So they must believe or trust God that God will shower them or show them towards the promised land. Now, listen to this. Fear is one of the most devastating and damaging problems a person can face. Fear, really. If you have that fear. Now, an otherwise strong person can become weak through fear. What's the story? The sermon last Sunday is about Elijah. Yeah. Elijah was a great prophet of God. He had taken a stand against 450 prophets of Baal. But a single threat from Jezebel, who was a woman, only one woman, sent him running for his life. He was afraid. Fear overwhelmed him and caused him to abandon God's work for a time. I think that would happen also to some Christians and even some missionaries or pastors in the ministry. When there's a fear that would overwhelm them, sometimes they forgot to put their trust in the Lord and abandon the work. Now, this can happen today also. If people fail to trust God and begin seeing the difficulties, they will cease their work for God, and fear can be a crossing problem. So that's the norm here. Sometimes there's a fear. Sometimes we have been praying for our situation in Barcelona. There's some mixed emotion, there's some fear, and there's some say, we'll just proceed, we'll do this, like that. So, there are many issues that we could consider. Now, let's see here, the provision of victory. The Israelites were in a terrible situation. In front of them was the Red Sea. Now look at this. Let's imagine this one. We are the Jewish people whom Moses delivered, and now we are trapped in the Red Sea. They had no boats and were unable to cross it. And behind them was the army of Pharaoh. This was the force which had held them in bondage for many years. Now, these former slaves were not soldiers. Consider that. They were slaves. So as a slave, they don't have the capacity to fight against the soldiers who are trained. So therefore, they will be defeated if they do that. They could not defeat their foe. What could they do? So God said in Exodus 14:15, wherefore, cries thou unto me, speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward. So this is the instruction of God to Moses. Now, it is a strange request. How could he move forward with his own sea? Like, are they going to go for swimming? Perhaps they could do that. They could not sustain for that long journey to swim across the ocean. So here the Red Sea was there, but God knew exactly what He would do. Yeah. Sometimes we face a Red Sea in our life, and we are helpless what to do. Lord, what will I do? Yeah. What would be the next step? And God will say, go forward. Lord, I don't know how to swim. There's no boat. So what would happen? So here, the Lord told Moses to lift his staff over the sea. So this is another lesson that we could learn. God will use what is in your hand. And what is in the hand of Moses? Sure. God says, use your rod. Raise it up. And then, when he did, God caused a strong wind to blow all night long. Just imagine that, all night long. So, in It's an overnight that there was strong wind. And then you can just imagine for that all night long, there's a strong wind, and it divided now the waters. Now the army of Pharaoh was hindered from advancing against them. You know the story, that during the day, God will give them the light, and then the army of Pharaoh will stop because, you know, of the work of the Lord, preventing the Jewish, or rather the armies of Pharaoh to catch over the Israelites. So here, behind them, and then we could see that God here, the army of Pharaoh was hindered from advancing against them, and God dried a path for the people of Israel to follow through the sea. Wonderful! He dried the path. So it's not a muddy place that they could walk in, because if it is still wet, the tendency is that it will slow them down to move.
Yeah.
And there are, you know, millions of them traveling. But it was there, it was really dried up. The land was really dried up. And God made it. And the nation had their escape route. They crossed the Red Sea on dry land. So wonderful. They did not swim. They did not take the boat. They didn't have ship. They could not build right away when the enemy is behind them. God released the Egyptian chariots after that. And they began chasing the people of Israel by going down into the sea. So when the Israelites reached the other end, then the Pharaoh of the soldiers and the chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen tried to catch up the Israelites. When all the army was in the sea, who among you have seen the Ten Commandments, you know, by Cecil DeMille? Perhaps all of us have seen that. When all the army was in the sea, God told Moses to stretch his hand over the sea once more. And then what happened when he did? God caused the waters to return to their former place. The army of Pharaoh was destroyed. You can just imagine. The water returned back to its place, and all the armies of Pharaoh were destroyed. Now, people often face situations that seem insurmountable. They cannot understand how victory over their troubles might come. Remember, God is bigger than any problem.
Yeah, amen.
Amen?
Amen.
If He had the power to open the Red Sea for His people to escape the opposing army, He can what? Handle any difficulty that comes in life today.
Amen.
So if we encounter some difficulties in life today, just look at what happened to the people in Israel. Just look at what happened to the Red Sea. You know, that's impossible for man to do it, but it's the hand of God doing it for them. He is no less God now than He was then. He is still in control. God's people always need to remember in 1 John 4:4, greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. So 1 John 4:4, greater is He that is in you than that is in the world. Greater is He that is in you. Who is in us? It's Jesus. It's the Lord. It's God. And who is in the world? That's the enemy. That's Satan. So greater is God who is in us. So the next thing is that the provision of rejoicing. You see here that God's promise of victory to the people of Israel should have produced a time of rejoicing in their hearts. They had been under the heavy hand of Egyptian taskmasters for many years. God had brought them out of their slavery and was setting them on the path to national sovereignty. Though they appeared trapped between the proverbial rock and a hard place, God had promised to bring them through this trial. He opened the sea to give them the path to follow to safety. And Moses lifted his hands over the sea, and the waters parted. They traveled through the sea on a path of dry land. When they arrived on the other side, and the Egyptians tried to follow them, God closed the waters and destroyed the enemy. Surely now they could rejoice.
Yeah.
Now in the New Testament also, you can see here, this is what Peter wrote to Christians in his day about the sore trials. because during the time of Peter, the Christians were persecuted.
Mm.
And then they regularly face it. So it was common for them to be persecuted because of their faith in Jesus Christ. So their persecutions is because they became Christians. Now, they were in heaviness through manifold temptations. This heaviness that is very heavy for them, manifold, it means many-sided temptations or trials. It's a test that comes through adversity. That is in 1 Peter 1:6. Now, no one enjoys difficult days. This is true whether the cause of the distress is a spiritual battle or a physical difficulty. Now, Peter encouraged the saints to remember what such problems could produce. The tribulations experienced should produce, verse 7, praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So if we are handling trials and testing now, we must not look upon the trials, but we must look beyond what will take place after the trials. Because in every trial, there is a purpose, and this purpose is to bring honor and glory to the Lord. Now, too many people focus solely on the problem rather than what it might bring. That's a normal tendency, because if you are in the center of the problem, you always find ways to, to complain or even to ask, to question God of what had happened to you. Now, a person going through like marital difficulties and problems in their marriage might be drawn into closer walk with the Lord. So, some situations like that between husband and wife relationship, there's some problem. The Lord allows that so that you will get closer to Him in that way, and thereby bringing Him greater worship. However, God uses His people. They should submit so they will bring Him honor and glory. So the bottom line here is that if there's trials and testing, don't try to fight back, but be submissive to what God wants you to do. Because in that way, if you just follow through, then God will show you His victory later on. Now, if that comes to pass through the difficulties of life, it can produce wondrous rejoicing in the heart of the believer. Now, perhaps some of you have experienced that. You encounter some difficulties that is very difficult in your imagination. If it is not for God, then you will not be the person that you are at this point. Because if you make wrong decisions and you do not put your faith in God regarding what to do, you just try to resolve some matters in your own hands, and you know that it is not His will, but since you cannot wait, then you do it, then eventually it leads you to a miserable life. But if you just follow, the leading of the Lord despite the pain, you just follow through whatever He leads, then you will see the glory later on. Now, by trusting and following Him through difficult days, people can rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory, in verse 8. So that's a very interesting verse here. It says here, rejoice with joy. Not only rejoice with joy, but there's a word here that says unspeakable. Unspeakable, what does it mean? Unspeakable, it means you cannot relate, you cannot express it in human, words. Because that joy is overflowing in your heart. And that's how you will respond after your great trial. So lastly, it's about the provision of courage. The provision of courage. It's so interesting in this point here because sometimes with Christians, courage only comes when they see the foe defeated. Right? Because when you have already the victory, then you have the courage. But during the trial, you don't have the courage. You have the fear.
Yeah.
You're afraid. What would happen? But when it's already finished, then you have the courage now, because you know that it's already overcome. Now, after the Lord was crucified, this is the story in the New Testament. The disciples went through a difficult